Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll be kicking off in just a couple of moments, so we'll just give everybody a couple of minutes just to enter the space. But looking forward to see a good session this afternoon. Okay, I think it's probably a good time to start. So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon on what is a rather wet and miserable day here in Mauritius, I think, for most of us. My name is Lisa Desoy. I'm Head of Skills at the Mauritius Africa FinTech Hub, and I welcome you to this afternoon's session where we will be discussing the recommendations that MAFH has recently submitted to the Ministry of Finance regarding budgetary measures. Joining me today for discussions, we have MAFH CEO, Michal Szymanski, and also Yusuf Bauluck, who is our Head of Regulations, who will be talking you through today's material. Just before we get started, I'd like to just make it known that this is a participatory session, so we really want you guys to chip in here with your questions, your concerns, any comments you might have around this issue or these issues, or anything you're not quite understanding. You do all have the ability to speak up in this session, so we do encourage you to raise your hand using the interface below at the bottom of the screen. You should see a little raise your hand button. So if you just click on that, we will see you, you will pop up and we'll be able to introduce you to ask your question. Or if you're feeling a little shy, you can always use the Q&A function, which is also at the bottom of your screen. Let's start off today's discussions by introducing the panelists themselves. So, Migs, can you start us off?
Sure thing. So, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michal Szymanski, as everybody probably here knows me as Migs. It's great to be here. It's great to be in a place where we've been able to consolidate a lot of information, a lot of recommendations, and a lot of feedback, not only from our members, but from the greater ecosystem as a whole. And I'm very pleased to be in an environment where we are openly sharing our recommendations that we have submitted to the Ministry of Finance. It's great to have seen all the feedback from the central bank, from the FSC, from the Ministry of Financial Services and Good Governance, and all the other kind of government departments that we've worked with. So it's great to be here, and I look forward to some of the discussions. Good to see everybody here.
Great, thanks for that. And Yusuf, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone, and good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. So I'm Head of Regulations at the Mauritius Africa FinTech Hub, and I've met a few of you advising you on regulatory matters or advising on the ways of policies moving forward in Mauritius. And the regulations pillar at the Mauritius Africa FinTech Hub has been quite active in making recommendations to different policymakers, and also participating in some key activities, which I will now run you through very shortly. As know that I want to give you the opportunity to ask us as many questions as possible on our recommendations. Just give me a minute.
No worries. Before you kick off, Yusuf, sorry, I think Lisa looked at me a little bit funny there, ladies and gentlemen, like I'm supposed to do a little bit more. So maybe just in terms of setting the scene. So MAFH, when giving everybody a little bit of background, when we came into being in October 2018, there was really kind of a deep dive that happened within the ecosystem to try to understand some of the challenges that everybody from the incumbents to startups, some of the challenges that exist on the ground. So what we did, we saw 432 different people within a space of 3 months, and we kind of co-created the 4 pillars that we now kind of work towards in trying to alleviate some of the constraints that have been built up. The most important one and the most important thread and feedback from those initial meetings and over the last 2 years has been regulation. Okay, everybody you speak to, whether it's a local fintech company, whether it's an incumbent, whether it's an international firm that is now in this dedicated new sector that is very young in comparison, talks about the regulatory aspect. And regulation is the one thing that if we do not get right as a community, as an ecosystem, as a country or a jurisdiction, it kind of does not allow us to do anything else outside of that sphere. As you've seen, kind of the instability that's happened with some of the announcements that come out from regulators over Africa. Regulation has the ability to really overnight not only kill industries, but to hamper the growth and the potential that this industry has within every kind of jurisdiction and economy out there. So when we did some these recommendations, this journey started over a year ago. We've received a lot of feedback from a lot of members. We've had a lot of discussions. We had a roundtable that happened in November last year where we saw, I think, 63 participants from 47 different companies, 6 different regulators coming together and really starting this journey of being very open and honest about what is required, what are the actions required, what are the legal implications, what is the regulatory framework that needs to exist or we'd like to exist. Keeping in mind that everybody you speak to, everybody has their own wish list, if you will. So what our role has been is to consolidate that wish list and formulate it into a very easily digestible action plan that the Ministry of Finance could potentially use in order to build that framework that is required locally for this industry to thrive. So it hasn't been an overnight thumbsuck. It's been a long period of interactions. It's been a lot of feedback from existing members, potential members, even from as far afield as academia, who play a critical role in that. So it's really been a combination of all of those factors. And from my side, thank you very much to everyone for sharing. It's easy as human beings to moan about the problem and not do anything about it. Our goal is the opposite, is let's listen to the moaning, let's listen to the problems, let's listen to the challenges that you experience, and then consolidate it. And let's see if together, by working together, we can execute the change that we want to see moving forward. So the recommendations are based around this aspect. Some of the recommendations were pulled from various parties and participants. As everything, we can't challenge everything head on, so every single recommendation that came through. So I'd like to firstly thank you for all the participants for giving us your feedback. We can't fix a problem if we don't know, A, there is a problem, and B, the nature of the problem. So thank you from myself for all those discussions and the feedback. I know we've spammed you over the last couple of months throughout this journey. But what we've come up with is what we believe, and Yusuf will elaborate and get very technical. He's the lawyer. I'm the guy who will try and elaborate a little bit more around the thinking and the purpose behind it. So I'll leave the technical aspects and the legalese, as I like to call it, to the expert. But from our side, it was really could we, all the challenges that we've noticed, all the feedback that we've received, could it be alleviated through some very key initiatives that by the nature of themselves could unblock some of the worries and concerns that actually exist lower down the value chain. So the question we've always had internally is, are we fixing the symptoms of the problem, or are we fixing and trying to address the problem itself? Because, for example, if you look at eKYC or some of these other amazing initiatives that we'd like to, for example, have as a legal framework or the adoption thereof, there still exists a legal framework that does not actually potentially make that possible to be applied in reality. So when we did this journey, we really deep dived into the problems that exist. Yusuf kindly dedicated his large portion of his life to not only reading and updating himself on the regulatory and the legal aspects of what exists currently, but then what would we need to do in order to change, A, in the short term, to have effective change in the short term, and then B, how do we make sure that that change is sustainable from a medium to a long-term perspective? So that's just kind of a little bit of the background from my side. Once again, this could not have been done without your input and your participation, so thank you. I know we were supposed to have another regulatory roundtable, which was supposed to be hosted, funny enough, this month, but due to lockdown, it's kind of affected our ability to pull everybody together, but not our ability to get your feedback electronically in the COVID 2021 that we exist. So thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for being part of the journey. And I'm very proud of the fact that we're being very, very transparent about what we are trying to achieve. For me, this isn't an exercise of just sharing some of the information with you and not giving you the gist of the problem. Post this webinar, there will be a communique going out from our chairman with all the recommendations. So you'll have actual digital copies in your inboxes, because our ethos from the get-go has been to be very open, very transparent, and to serve the ecosystem. And we cannot do that if we are talking about something and you potentially don't get a chance to read through it yourself and at some stage give us even more feedback to some of the challenges or some of the solutions that we are putting forward. So thank you for being here. Thank you for participating, and we look forward to the next session with you.
Great, thanks, Migs. Yusuf, maybe you can talk us through the sort of processes that have gone into this and the engagements that you've been participating in over the last year leading up to this.
Sure, Lisa. Thank you very much, Migs, for the overview as to what we've been doing. I must say it's a team effort, and as you rightly mentioned, it's a journey. And we want to get the right regulations across that's market feasible and does not impact negatively on the growth of the fintech industry. Without further ado, I'll just walk you through the activities that we've been conducting in terms of regulation. Okay, so there we go. So beyond participating in activities with a local perspective, we've also been collaborating with the Comedza Business Council, working on policies to have a common payment framework that happened around October, November. And in November, as Migs mentioned, we had our big event for regulations, which is a regulatory roundtable. We were lucky to have the participants, including regulators, policymakers, a lot of stakeholders across different industries, commercial banks, fintech payment service providers, management companies, and a lot of innovators in blockchain, AI. So, and our topics were quite relevant, and we use those data to make recommendations to the Bank of Mauritius working group sessions, the FSC, and also to the Ministry of Financial Services and Good Governance, and the Ministry of Finance as well. And we had a few of working group sessions spanning from December, January to February. So quite numerous working group sessions with FSC on topics like virtual assets. With the Bank of Mauritius, we were trying to look at ways to modernize banking legislation and how to make it more fintech friendly. And we also participated into financial inclusion.
Jenny, les chiens, il faut les taper, Jenny, sinon.
Sorry. Do you have a question, Sebastian?
Oh.
Okay, carry on, Yusuf.
Okay, so what regulation has been doing is to look both within Mauritius and the African movement and see how we can make our regulatory framework more effective and efficient. And what we are looking for is that we'll always be playing catch up with innovation. Innovation would be a step ahead, but it's about how to make the regulations friendly and efficient towards them. And all those innovators can rest assured that Mauritius Africa FinTech Hub is being quite proactive into its interaction with different regulators and policymakers to make things move. So that's what we've covered during the year till now. And unfortunately, we did have to postpone our regulatory roundtable, but it's coming in July. So keep an eye on the mailing list for the dates and the agenda. So I'll just wait for your questions.
Yeah, so just as a reminder, everyone, this, as I said, is a participatory session. We do encourage you to jump in with your questions. If you do want to submit a question, please do raise your hand so that we know. And also, it's great if you want to turn on your video feed so that we can see your face. That's an added bonus too. But yeah, we're really looking for you guys to jump in here with your questions and comments. So Yusuf, thanks very much for the overview of what you've been up to. You've certainly been very busy over the last few months. Could you tell us a bit about how this data that's being gathered it has been utilized?
Sure. I must say, first of all, it's a team effort, it's not only me. And I must say kudos to the team at Mauritius Africa FinTech Hub. So to get back to your question, I mean, we gathered a lot of data from both our members and the wider FinTech ecosystem. For example, when we did the regulatory roundtable. So we have two sets of events. I like to call them as formal events like the regulatory roundtable, and some more informal events like the beer and pizza, or when we have members walking in and just having a friendly chat. But all those events, an interaction help us to gather data about the pain points, what is causing the friction in terms of licensing, and what we are looking forward as well, because we are operating from Mauritius, but we are looking outwards towards Africa and other jurisdictions. And how can we push that, for example, to undertake remote transactions, and how those MSMEs that are doing cross-border transactions with Africa, the difficulties they are facing. For example, we uncovered that it takes up to 6 months for an SMEs to open a bank account in Mauritius, which is really a long time. And investors, they just want to get from the ground up and start operating, or some other SMEs are facing high cost of remittance fees, which in those days can be overcome through much more efficient payment networks. And in terms of other topics we addressed was like financial crime, and we're seeing it nowadays. It's quite a contemporaneous topics, what is happening with the EC blacklisting, and how we have innovative solutions to address those issues. And I think those data that has been captured throughout those events and interaction with members have been submitted to the right regulators for them to action upon it. But we have to be realistic, but it involves a lot of decision making at their level. And we keep on pushing those recommendations to regulators and policymakers. And we are hoping, and it's going along the right way so far. And I must say that the FSC, for example, has been very proactive into seeking recently views on the FinTech service provider license. And the Ministry of Financial Services and Good Governance had a call for papers 2 weeks ago, and we submitted a substantial number of recommendations. So, and I think with the budget recommendation, the latest submissions we did, we are pushing forward the agenda that we want to turn Mauritius into a leading FinTech hub, and to facilitate it for both innovators, investors, and we want everyone to be able to collaborate together. That's the end goal for us at the MAFH. So I hope that answers your question, Lisa.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you. Migs, did you want to add something in here?
Yeah, so thanks, Lisa. So from my side, you know, outside of the beer and pizzas and the drunk talk that we take our recommendations from for our budgetary submissions, you know, a big thank you to all the associations, Business Mauritius, Mauritius Finance, BOM, all of these regulators that have actually come together and are working together towards a common message. I think for me, that's been one of the big wins that has happened specifically over the last year, is that everybody's starting to be united in what we are trying to achieve for Mauritius. You know, if you have 100 voices shouting at you for 100 different ways of things and to change, there's a certain amount of noise that can exist, and it's very hard to interpret that noise with what should be done. You know, for me, the fact that we work with Business Mauritius, we work with business with Mauritius Finance, we work with all the stakeholders, we're with government organizations, with the private sector, with the academia, and now we're uniting the message to what is really required in this ecosystem. And even, for example, the Mauritius Bankers Association, everybody is saying the same message moving forward. And for me, that is a big win when the ecosystem unites and you have shared common goals and visions and outcomes that you want to achieve. Because no matter how many cool budget recommendations you put forward, nothing will change if we don't have execution on the ground. And as Yusuf knows, he caught me the other day and said, on average, it takes, I think, 4.1 years to change laws in Mauritius. And he made a little joke about it. I said, Yusuf, you have 3 to 6 months. That is kind of how serious we are about the execution element. And obviously he took the next couple of days off because he was feeling rather ill. But that is how serious we are in terms of trying to push and make this move forward. So from a budget recommendations perspective, you know, it's great to see we all united. But now is the time for execution. Now is the time for the regulators, for the government to really unite behind the single message of trying to drive the change and execute on the change that we need to see, not even want to see, that we need to see happen on the ground for this industry and for the sector to grow into the very short and long term. So from my side, big thank you to all of those. I know it's been we've got a lot of feedback from a lot of stakeholders around, you know, that a lot of these issues have been in the pipeline for a number of years. Our goal from these recommendations is to really put time frames towards this, and also to create a sense of openness and information sharing to make everybody aware of what is happening on the ground. Because if you're doing something by yourself and not communicating with anybody else, what is the point? Okay, and everybody will start doing their own thing. So I'm glad to see, I'm proud to see that the messages are being unified across the ecosystem. I'm glad to see a lot of budget recommendations coming through from the beer and pizza evenings, because people feel a little bit safer to talk in an open forum. And I look forward to really working together, to executing and pushing for the change that we need. Thanks so much, Lisa.
That's great. Thanks, Migs. And I think you'll have to head off to the BOM shortly to continue to fight for the cause. Okay, so thanks so much, Migs. So we do have a few questions that have popped up in the chat. Apologies, guys, that I had requested you to put it in the Q&A. I realize now you've all been promoted to panelists and therefore cannot use the Q&A function. So yeah, if you don't fancy speaking out loud, we can accept them through the chat as well. So the first question I see here comes from Gulshan. As I understand, some years ago in Mauritius, the financial institutions in Mauritius can only hold their data on local Mauritius cloud. Have there been any changes to this?
All right, okay. Hi, Gulshan. Thank you very much for your question. To get back to your question about cloud storage of data, I'm just going to refer you back to the Bank of Mauritius guidelines on that specific topic. That has been issued, if I'm not mistaken, a year ago, where it set a series of process and steps to be taken for cloud computing, especially when financial institutions are outsourcing their services. Security measures to be taken, risk analysis. It covers I would say it's quite a comprehensive guideline that has been put up. So you mentioned only on local cloud platforms. That was the case years ago, but now there are several banks that are using cloud platform operated by Oracle or Amazon Web Services. And that has gone through the process of approval by BOM, but it is a prerequisite of any banks or financial institutions to run a due diligence on the operators they are outsourcing the activities, be it on cloud computing, or is it for storage of their data, backups, and any other material activities related to the financial institution. They will need to run a due diligence to make sure that those people are fit and proper, and then put the application forward to the BOM to get their approval, and then they can start using it. Just to let you know that is identified as a pain point at this stage, because, for example, you have major cloud platform operators like Oracle and Amazon Web Service. Sorry if I keep referring to them, but there's a major one that's being used across the world. And they have all the compliance, be ISO compliant in terms of encryption and multiple two-factor authentication, segregation of data. All this has already been identified and tested at numerous levels, but we still have a pain point of having to do the due diligence and submitting the application for approval to BOM. And what we are seeking in the future is that there would be a pre-vetted list of cloud platform providers. So that's our wish for cloud computing. I hope that answers your question, Gulshan.
And it looks like Gulshan has also followed up with a second question about, are there solutions like Stripe for Mauritius, which are allowed to be connected to local banks? What's the innovation in this area?
I think if we're referring to mobile wallet or digital wallet, the BOM has launched the MOCAS platform 2 years ago, which is based on Open API. And the idea behind MOCAS is to allow banks and non-bank operators to participate, to be able to conduct remittance on a 24-hour, 7-day basis, and in almost instantaneous So we, for example, if we've seen the solution offered by Mighty Money or MTEL Wallet Cash, so they are using the MOCAS platform to be able to load credit to your wallet. So there's already room to get onto the MOCAS platform and use it to remit money from a bank account to another service providers.
Great, thank you. And we also have Sudhir, who has a question for us. Sudhir, you're off mute. You should be able to address us.
Yeah. Hi, Yusuf. This is Sudhir. I'm CTO for SIP Finance. I had two questions. The first one is relating to eKYC. While eKYC was enacted, I think about 2 years back for use of the data, we still see the regulators hesitant to release those APIs for fintechs as well as financial institutions to consume them. That's one. Is there any guidelines coming quickly around that? That's number one. Number two is the open API that Bank of Mauritius has just launched in. Is there going to be a PSD2 sort of framework coming in to use those open APIs so that fintechs can build on a basis of those APIs?
All right, okay. Thank you, Sudhir, for your question. I'll just address the first one, the one about eKYC. So the BOM has been, well, first of all, just to give you a brief background, eKYC has been mentioned in the budget in 2017, and the Bank of Mauritius has been working actively on to pushing forward for a platform, has been requesting for bidders to submit their proposal. But unfortunately, at this stage, we're still waiting for the eKYC platform. So if you look at the BOM website for the latest request for proposal, you'll see that they're still working on the fine tuning of how the final solution would look like. So at this moment, we don't have any guideline as such. So that's very unfortunate because we are pushing for fintech and we want to be able to do remote transaction, remote onboarding of clients, and we can't do it at the moment until and unless we have an eKYC platform. To get back to the second question you asked about open API and if we have something similar to PSD2, So yes, MOCAS is based on Open API. And so what's the idea behind Open API is that we'll have both the banks and the non-banking financial institution able to cooperate together to transact and remittance of funds between themselves. So as I mentioned earlier in my answer to Gulshan, we'll have Mighty Money, which is a non-banking financial institution. I mean, I'll call it a non-banking financial institution because they are transacting in funds, who are able to access funds from your bank account. And that's with the consent of the client, obviously. And then just remit the money, because previously, if you had to load money onto a digital wallet or mobile wallet, you had to go to the customer service point and load the money physically there, which is counterintuitive. And now with MOCAS, it's more streamlined, I would say. And I think that opens up a lot of services. And for fintech providers, if tomorrow we have online and insurance, like we're talking about insurtech, wealth tech, so they can easily like lose their funds, their wallet or their portfolio from their bank account. So those are the two questions you had. And
yeah.
Do you have any more questions?
We do have a couple more questions, but I'm thinking at this point, Yusuf, maybe we should dig into what the specific recommendations that you made in the budgetary recommendation paper, and then we can perhaps come back to take a few more questions. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
So let's start. The recommendations that were put forward covered a number of different areas, including the establishment of a fintech unit, digital banking, open banking, and various business facilitation measures. Let's start with fintech unit. Can you kind of tell us what is a fintech unit and why do we need one? And give us a few more details about that recommendation.
Sure. So during our interaction with members and the wider ecosystem, we identified one of the common pain points was, which is quite unfortunate, they are not sure which regulations apply to them or which regulator they should approach. Just to give you an example, we have the FSC issuing a license for payment intermediary service, and we have the BOM issuing licenses for payment service providers. And in other jurisdictions, those two names can overlap. So payment intermediary service license is called payment service providers. And that gives, like, especially if it's a foreign investor or innovator, it confuses them. And even for me at times, I had to go around to look into several materials to find out exactly which is which. And so we thought, like, there should be a centralized point of information where the policymakers, together with the regulators, can cooperate, collaborate, and let each other know what is being done in their pipeline. For example, we are working on 2 virtual assets right now. So what will be the outcome? What are the expected gain impact from it? And so that the investor or the innovator can just approach the fintech unit or innovation unit and get the right information. And then the fintech unit would be a very specialized one. So they will be able to deliver information that's targeted to the fintech industry. That's our aim, really. And then that would promote investment and innovation, because sometimes people are put off, and they'll, especially investors, but they lack the confidence to get into the Mauritian jurisdiction due to a lack of information. I think that's why we recommended the fintech unit to be set up.
Okay, great. And how do you see the fintech unit supporting the ecosystem generally?
So we see it as being a one point of contact for the fintech industry. So dissemination of accurate information in a timely manner, especially that recently we've noticed a lot of call for papers, be it from the Ministry of Financial Services and Good Governance, the FSA, BOM. Everyone has been very active, I must say, in Mauritius to seek views from the stakeholder, which is a very good news, I must say, to gather information from the stakeholders. But sometimes too much requests to the stakeholders get them confused as to what's really going to happen, how is it going to take shape. So I think that would be able to enlighten people, not only in Mauritius, but outside as well, because we want to be the leading FinTech hub. So to be the leading FinTech hub, we want to get clarity across board as to what we want to do, what can be done actually in Mauritius, and why people should come to Mauritius. What are the advantages compared to other jurisdictions? So I think that's how we can drive innovation and investment through the FinTech unit.
Great. I think that sort of speaks for itself, but if anybody has any specific questions relating to the FinTech unit, do give us a shout and we can elaborate some more there. The second recommendation area that was addressed in the budget recommendations are related to digital banking. Perhaps you could start, Yusuf, just by telling us a bit about what we mean by digital banking. All right, okay. So digital banking in itself, I'll go by the legal definition as set out in the Banking Act. It's any banking business that's conducted exclusively through technological means or electronically. It's a very short definition of digital banking, and I think very much precise, but there are a lot of services attached to digital banking. So we have, for example, right now a lot of people are relying on juice payment, for example, since they can't, with the lockdown, they can't conduct the transaction in the way they used to be. But it's also include opening of bank accounts, any banking activities that can be done through a conventional bank is just being done remotely. So be it like opening a saving account, contracting a loan, a leasing for a car, insurance, I'd say any sort of doing remittance through the bank can be done through digital banking, and it can be done through either your desktop computer or an app on your smartphone. So that's what digital banking would be taken about to mean. So within digital banking then, okay, one of the recommendations that MAFH made was regarding capital requirements. Can you tell us more about that? Sure. Just to give you a background of what's happening into the banking industry at the moment. We have I mentioned the Banking Act, which is the main legislation for licensing and supervision of banks in Mauritius. And the legislation has been amended in June 2020 to provide for digital banking. And unfortunately, we're using the same licensing process and same principle applied to conventional banks to digital bank. So in a broad headline, our recommendation would be to either have a new legislation in itself, catering for digital banking business, or to make proper amendments to have a specific section or even a part dedicated to digital banking. And as Migs mentioned, and that's my concern as well, any new legislation takes a long time and will just be like lagging behind. So we are looking like even further down than 4.5 years to get that legislation. So we are making piecemeal amendment. And to get back to capital requirements, what you ask about. So that right now, the capital requirement is 400 million, or its equivalent in a foreign currency. It's a lot for a digital bank, and it puts them off from investing and even considering to apply for a digital bank license, even though the legislation provides for it. So what we've been recommending is to have a lower capital requirement for digital bank with a limited set of activities. And as they progress along, the capital requirement can be increased. So as an illustration, we'll be having a tiered licensing process. So we set the capital requirement at X amount for one or two activities, be it like opening up a saving account. And as they progress, it evolves, and they are like subject to the monitoring of the Bank of Mauritius, they can apply for a further license, which allow them to conduct more activities. And obviously the capital requirement increases until they're like a full-fledged digital bank.
offering the full services that were offered by a conventional bank, then they can be having the capital requirement imposed of 400 million. So it gives them an opportunity both for the digital bank to test the market. I mean, Mauritius is a small market, 1.4 million inhabitants, and also for the Bank of Mauritius to assess their performance along the way and any risk that is being perceived to the economic of Mauritius can be addressed right there. So it's being fair to both parties, both to the investor in a digital banking business and to the BOM as a supervisor and regulator of the banking industry. I think that's why we made that recommendation on capital requirement.
Okay. So ideally, what would a licensing process for digital banking look like?
So right now, it's the same requirement as the one applied for a conventional bank. So we'd start with the individuals. So those are the directors and senior officers, but they need to have the proper technical knowledge and that's very important, especially with what's happening into the AML CFT framework, is that they need to be fit and proper person. And then we move on to the financial resources and the capital structure of the bank. And then we look at the risk assessment that they have feasible plans for the future, including their internal control are sound. And then that they are willing to comply with any regulations or guidelines that are promulgated by the Bank of Mauritius. So it's quite an extensive set of licensing requirements that are imposed on banks, given the impact that they can have on the economy, and also they are dealing with people's money. I think they have their reason to be there. Our concern is about the capital requirement, and there are services, for example, that a digital bank might not be interested on its setting up. For example, I'm thinking of a fixed deposit account. They might not be willing to offer that from day one. They might consider it later on, but that's a lesser risk from the digital banking perspective. So I think it's fair that they are imposed a less capital requirement on them.
Okay, great. And you mentioned consumers there. Obviously, many consumers might not be that familiar with digital banking. What sort of proposals are there, or measures for consumer protection?
All right. So what we recommended to the Ministry of Finance as part of our recommendation would be to use the existing legislation. So we have in Mauritius Deposit Insurance Scheme Act 2019, where the depositor is protected up to 300,000 rupees. So we are saying if we have concerns about digital bank posing a risk to consumers, why not limit the maximum deposit with a digital bank to be capped at 300K? So in that instance, the consumer is protected through the legislation that's already in place. And subsequently, as I mentioned, it's the Bank of Mauritius conduct quite an extensive monitoring and supervision of the banks in Mauritius. So as they see that the bank is performing according to the set standards and is not posing a risk to consumers, they can remove that cap and then increase it just be like a conventional bank. Unlimited amount of deposit in a bank account, or otherwise they can say, okay, we'll increase it from 300K to 500K and be subject to further monitoring until we are satisfied that all the conditions are met. So that's one of the measures we recommended for consumer protection. And secondly, we recommended that the Bank of Mauritius do some outreach program to educate people on what is digital banking. And why we made that recommendation and is because during the lockdown, the first lockdown we experienced, we saw that there was a lot of scams happening through text messages, asking people to log into their internet banking. And unfortunately, some people fell victim of those scams, and we just want to have more outreach program to educate the population.
Yeah, no, a wise move, I think, there. And, do you feel that the Mauritian public is ready for digital banking and has the appetite for it?
Well, I would just be like objective as possible, looking at the statistics and how we seen an increasing number of people using digital modes of payment, be it through card or mobile payment. And we've seen as well, there's been a lot of e-commerce platform coming on, and they're offering like prices that are quite competitive, I must say, with delivery charges sometime waived. So, and then it's getting people more interested into like, why should I go out and put myself at risk, especially during the lockdown, when I can have the goods delivered to my place. And I think it's a trend that has continued even after the first lockdown, where we've seen people even keener to have their products delivered to their workplace, where they don't have to spend waste time, be it in the traffic or finding a parking spot, which is becoming harder nowadays. So I think people are keen to get on board, and data suggests that's the case anyway. There's a high mobile penetration in Mauritius. Internet connectivity is on the rise. Mobile data prices are being slashed as we're speaking. And I think there's a lot of factors that contribute to people getting on board with digital banking. Great,
okay. I think before we move on to further recommendations that were made in the budget, we'll take a couple of questions because we've got some people who've been very patiently waiting there. Sandeep, you have a question, I think. Sandeep?
Yes, hi Lisa.
Hi.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, for the explanation. Definitely a lot of progress has been made. One question that I had is that, I've been following MAFH, and in fact, I was a banker myself, and have seen that most of the banks and Mauritius Telecom has joined the network. And a lot of fintechs were in the pipeline applying for the licenses, right? And I guess that was taking a lot of time, where MAFH was also intervening and helping accelerate the process. So what is the status of these licensees today, and what is the opportunity for new licensees to come, and what's the turnaround time for them to get these licenses? This would also be a recommendation in case the existing process is slow. Then what can be done to fast track this, because this will be the fulcrum for a lot of the digital banking initiatives, wherein you can connect with all the banks and enable transactions. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sandeep.
All right, okay. Thank you, Sandeep, for your question. If I understood correctly, you're seeking as a means to fast track applications so that digital bank can join the network. At this stage, unfortunately, we have not had any digital bank applying for a license. For the reasons that I mentioned, one of the pain points is the capital requirement that might have been putting off a lot of people to invest in a digital bank license. But there are also other practical difficulties that the digital bank would face. So as I mentioned when I started to talk about digital bank, the definition itself is that it has to be, the banking activities has to be conducted exclusively through electronic or technological means. At this moment, I mean, one of the attendees question about eKYC, we're still waiting for it. So we can't do remote onboarding of clients. So that's going to be a difficulty for any digital bank unless they want to develop their own solution in-house for running the KYC and onboarding of clients. However, I must say that the Bank of Mauritius is very much open to consider any applications for digital bank or how to join the MAFH network. And it has been promoted as being open to banks and non-banks institutions. So does that answer your question?
Just to add, Yusuf, I wanted to inquire about access to MAFH. So through the BIP PSP license that exists, right, be access to the MAFH system where a fintech can come and integrate with the entire Mauritian banking ecosystem.
Oh, sorry, I misunderstood your question, Sandeep. So yes, they can join it as a PSP licensee, and the MAFH, as I mentioned, has been open to banks and non-bank financial institutions. So I don't see any reason why why a fintech provider would not be able to join in on and participate in the MOCAs. We've already seen Mighty Money, and for example, we've also seen MTEL, who are joining and able to load your funds, to reload your funds, your wallet through the MOCAs. And that's the system that they've been using.
Okay. All right, thank you for the question. Sudhir, you have a question for us.
Yeah, again, two questions. One is the follow-up question. Infoway of the government already has a lot of APIs that have been built, including eKYC is one of them, which means it has a national ID data that is available, and the APIs are being used by the government bodies for their own consumption. With the data already available, why is it necessary for Bank of Mauritius to build another ecosystem for eKYC? Why can't we just use those APIs or allow the fintechs to use those APIs? That's number one. Number two is, in your recommendation to the finance minister, have you recommended any tax swaps or tax holidays for the fintechs to promote business or give them leeway in terms of the revenues that they are going to generate for a certain period of time? Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sudhir. So to get back to the API question you mentioned, it's true that there's been API developed by different government agencies. And unfortunately, those have not been made available to fintech industry. And part of our, some of our recommendation is to deal with open APIs, where we suggested the setting up of a repository. And I think we'll be covering that shortly as part of the Lisa's question. But just to give you a brief summary, we recommended setting up of an API repository, just that it's free and fair for everyone to have access to those APIs and can be more competitive in their respective market and industry. So I'll leave those questions to API, will be addressed shortly by Lisa, I hope. So to get back to the tax holidays you mentioned, one, we included those into the business facilitation measures. What we recommended was that the R&D tax incentive that's currently expiring in June 2022, where any entity, local-based entity conducting R&D in Mauritius can apply a double deduction in their financial account. So what we've recommended is that this scheme be extended for more years, and then that it includes R&D that's carried out outside of Mauritius. So those are twofold measures. One, obviously, for the tax benefit to local entities. And secondly, we've identified in the course of our interaction with members and the wider ecosystem that there's a shortage of talents in Mauritius in innovative sectors like artificial intelligence, big data, machine learning. And we're hoping that once those R&D are developed outside of Mauritius, one of the conditions that we suggested be imposed on those entities, that the IP rights be assigned exclusively to the Mauritius-based entity, and then the Mauritius-based entity can sublicense those R&D to further fintech or other companies involved in AI, ML, or big data. And that would help to build the local know-how and build the talent base. Those are our recommendations in terms of tax facilities. And I'm sure that other entities like Business Mauritius has been making further recommendations for tax holidays in line with what has been happening over the last budget, where we had tax holidays for the next 5 years in terms of investment into hardware and software. And I hope that answers your question, Sudhir.
Yeah, thanks, Yusuf.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Right. We have a few more questions coming up, but I think some of these questions might be addressed in our next section on the recommendations regarding open banking. So if perhaps we'll move to discuss those, and then we can follow up with the questions after that. So yeah, open banking is one of the areas which MAFH gave forward some recommendations. Yusuf, could you start by just walking us through what open banking is?
Sure. So the principle behind open banking is that traditionally, consumer data, especially pertaining to the financial circumstances, is held under a lot of confidentiality clauses and legislation that is treated as very sensitive information. And what open banking is about, it's to open up access to those data, the transaction data, the customer data, through open APIs. And as Sudhir mentioned, open APIs can facilitate the growth of the fintech industry. And so what it allows is to be the different banks and financial institutions to exchange information between themselves relating to their customer and in a standard format. So that's the whole principle of open banking, and how it benefits the industry is that, for example, you have a bank account with XYZ, just a name out there, XYZ Bank, and you want to take an insurance or take an investment with another company called ZBC. So XYZ and ZBC can immediately transfer information to know the credit score of that individual, how much they are indebted towards the bank, and they can make custom-made an investment that's more appropriate to the customer. So it gives like that level of customization and bespoke service to the consumer, but previously was not possible because the data were held in different silos and they could not exchange it freely. So open banking opens literally the floodgate, and it actually enhances, first of all, its consumer experience. And also it allows fintech service providers to give more services which are customized to the consumer's needs. And it opens up competition because the consumer can compare what he's getting as a deal from the insurance company, company A, B, C, and make a comparison. Okay, I'm getting the better deal at insurance company B, and I'll go towards that company. Whereas right now, it's very much a subjective assessment. And we hope that with open banking, with the access to those data, for example, we have one of our members, FinTech, which as part of their process needs to run credit scoring. And I think it's the same case for a lot of the fintech companies. And that credit scoring can be streamlined and made more efficient through the use of open API and having a standardized credit scoring system.
Okay, great. So what were MAFH's recommendations made around open banking?
So what we recommended is to have an API repository, which would be used to manage and store all the available APIs. And as Sudhir mentioned, he's lucky to know that there's API that has been developed for the national identity card. A lot of stakeholders are unaware as to which APIs are available on the island and what are accessible, because some of them are only accessible to government agencies. Some are more open and available to private entities. And it's also to give them that bird's eye view of the available API, but also to make it free, to make it a fair access of the APIs. So we don't want a monopoly to be developing along the line, so that we know that, for example, BOM has an API developed for reporting. So we want everyone that has to file in a report with BOM to be aware of that API. It saves them money and time as well, but they don't have to. Why would an innovator having to reinvent part of the wheel when it's already available at this stage? And they can just tap in with the right sharing access provided to them, and start using it. So those are the ideas behind having an open API repository. And it would also be, we left it open as to who would be managing those repositories, but we requested that there are guidelines which foster the design, development, and deployment of API to support open banking initiatives in Mauritius. And those guidelines, we want them to be quite open and fair to everyone, so that we have the incumbent banks that can use those API, but also the challenger banks or even the FinTech innovators can tap in and have a fair access.
Great. Okay, so I think that probably helps address some of the questions, but we'll come to the specific questions after this section. So from a consumer perspective, obviously this is about sharing data between different providers and platforms. So what sort of protections are in place for a consumer's data?
So right now, as it stands at the moment, we already have the data protection legislation in Mauritius, and consumer data are very sensitive. So what we are, as part of the open banking principle, the consumer needs to consent to the sharing of his or her information. And whenever she decides to stop the sharing of his or her information, she can revoke her consent. That's one of the fundamental basis of open banking, because we don't want to have an abuse of the consumer data used for, and then they are just being spammed with services that they don't want, or their data being used for other purposes other than those that they consented for in the first place. So that's a level of protection that's afforded. And obviously the same protection that's offered by the data protection legislation would be imposed upon anyone who uses this consumer data. So that's like including data breaches to be notified, and the necessary security measures, be it encryption, two-factor authentication. All those measures would have to be in place to make sure that the consumer data is as safe as possible. So I hope that answers and put your mind at peace.
Yeah, I'm ready and waiting for it to all open up. So let's turn now to a couple of questions that I think are related to this area. From Iman, we have one. What are your views on having absolutely mighty money paying CEB and CWA bills? Does that not represent a monopoly in the government fintech realm?
All right, okay, that's a tricky question from Iman. I think it's more to do with commercial relationships that has been identified between the parties. I'm not privy to what sort of remuneration or percentage commission has been agreed between them, but I think at the outset, it might give the impression that there's a monopoly, but I think if we look at it from further from the old days, anyone could do a standing order from the banks, be it MCB or SPM, to do the payment of their utility bills. So I think in that particular case, it's more of a commercial transaction that has been agreed and was favorable to go with Mighty Money rather than any other mobile payment providers.
Okay. Yeah. And we have a couple of questions from Parmesh. Under what license schedule is Mighty using MoCas? Is his first question. And then a follow-up question, is Mighty Money a PSP licensee or a PIS licensee?
All right, okay. So under what license? All right, okay. I think the Mighty Money falls under the mobile payment guidelines that was issued by the Bank of Mauritius. And also the type of license they would be using would be the PSP, the Payment Service Provider license issued by the Bank of Mauritius. Yeah.
Okay, great. We don't have any more questions on the open banking at the moment. Let's move on to the final area in which MAFH made recommendations, and that is around business facilitation measures. So you spoke briefly already on the R&D tax incentive, but could you just elaborate a little on that?
Sure. So the research and development tax incentive was promoted 2 years ago, and its aim was to enhance and grow the talent base in Mauritius in innovative areas. Unfortunately, the growth that was expected has not happened. I mean, we did have experienced some growth, but not to the extent we were looking forward. And we are hoping that with the recommendation that we made to include research and development conducted outside of Mauritius be falling into that scheme, and that scheme be extended beyond June 2022. So the current scheme as currently worded, it covers only R&D in Mauritius, which entitle those companies to have a double taxation, double deduction for those expenses. And we hope that having those technologies brought and assigned to the IP right assigned to the local company would enhance and further grow the talent base in Mauritius, as they have the groundwork already on which to work on. So those are, that's why we recommended the R&D tax incentive scheme to be amended in that light.
Okay. And other than financial benefits, how would that help promote the fintech industry?
Okay, okay. So what we are experiencing in Mauritius at the moment is that a lot of the fintech entrepreneurs and innovators, they're doing a considerable work, and I must say congratulations to them for the amount of work they're doing. But it can be speeded up by having the know-how from other innovators assigned to them, and rather than developing it from scratch. And I'm thinking just aloud, for example, about natural language processing, which could help a digital bank, for example. So they won't have like an actual customer service agent at the back and just have a chatbot, which is answering all their queries, or even an insurtech company, or even a conventional bank, rather than being on the phone for hours and waiting and being transferred to get an answer to your specific query. You could just, I can see how you relate to that. The yes. Frustration, and you're just on the phone with that jingle playing on, and when you could just be like a few keys and a chatbot gives you the right answer. Yeah.
No, I can't wait to get my hands on the answers faster. Less time on the phone, the better, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, great. So another recommendation you made in the facilitation, business facilitation measures was relating to the registrar of companies and turning that into a one-stop shop. Is that not already the case?
You're right, Lisa. For example, the registrar of companies is already collecting trade license fees from companies and sole traders in Mauritius. However, what we want to push that even further. As you know, that we're talking a lot about fintech, and a lot of our fintech innovators and entrepreneurs rely a lot on consumers' data. And we want to make it as a one-stop shop to but the registrar of company act as an agent for the data protection office. So the registration would be done as they are incorporating their company. They pay for the fees. And some might say, well, it's a bit ambiguous, but they have not started trading already, and we're asking them to register with the data protection office. And I've known for a fact that a lot of our members have been very cautious and proactive, already done their business plan to the dot, and they're already aware as to what data would be collected. They have the database, and it's just a matter of submitting the paperwork and being registered as a data controller or processor, as the case may be. And it would simplify life for themselves, because whenever, I mean, the data protection registration at the moment, it's valid for 2 years. And they will know that every 2 years, when they're paying their dues with the registrar of company, they can pay for the data protection office registration fees as well. And it would, I think on another aspect, I mean, reading the Data Protection Office annual report, where they say that they are overstretched in terms of workforce. So that could alleviate some of the burden and in terms of registration and be able to be focusing on awareness and also enforcement programs. So that would be a bit easy on them, I guess.
Yeah, so it would really help streamline the process for people sort of setting up at the beginning, and that's great.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And the final area that recommendations were made in relates to the regulatory sandbox license, the RSL. What are your views on the RSL?
Personally, I think the RSL is working really well, being really incredible, because I mean, the basis of the regulatory sandbox license is to provide a testing ground where we have no legislation or the current legislation is inappropriate for the proposed activity. And when we are talking about FinTech related activities, we're always a step ahead. So we've been talking about peer-to-peer lending rules, activities, and we've talked about blockchain-backed loan facilities. Those are like miles ahead of what the current legislation back in the days had in mind. Just to give you an example, but it's, I mean, the RSL committee features several government agencies from a regulations perspective. That includes the FSC, the FSC, BOM, and we also have the ADB sitting there on the committee, and we have the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Financial Services and Good Governance, the Financial Intelligence Unit, and the Attorney General sends a representative. So it's a very broad committee to analyze, because we don't want to take any risk to launch, to promote a product or services that's inadapted to the market, especially when there are no legislation. And I think that it has proven itself over the years. We have, for example, the peer-to-peer lending activity, which was initially under the RSL, and it has demonstrated that it is a product that is safe and meets the market needs. And the FSC eventually promulgated the peer-to-peer lending rules. And I think looking forward into more down the line, we will have more activities that are under the RSL and would now be having their own set of rules. So I think that's very promising, and I look forward to looking at more RSL holders graduating under formal rules.
Great. Yes, we all do that. We're all looking forward to that. So could you tell us a little bit more about what the recommendations are that MAFH put forward around the RSL?
Sure. One of the, well, we had, given that it's been working so well, we only had one recommendation regarding the RSL, and that's a pain point that's we identified together with our members and prospective members that approach the hub, which is the delay that it takes to open a bank account in Mauritius. So one of our recommendations, well, only one, is to streamline and reduce that time frame to open a bank account by having a letter of pre-approval issued to the applicant, and but the applicant can go to the commercial bank and say, there it is, I have my license being processed by the ADB Secretariat and soon by the committee, so can I please have a bank account? So that bank account would be a specific one where you can use it for working for paying the overheads. Just very limited services can be attached to it. So it can conduct its R&D at the moment, not trading, not using it for trading because they are not regulated yet. They don't have a license. I need to underline that. But once they have the license approved by issued by the ADB, they can go back to the bank and say, now we have our license, can we have a full-fledged banking account? And the other case, if the RSL is not approved, the ADB can inform the bank, say, please be notified, but the applicant has not been successful, and cancel the bank account facilities that's been offered to them. So we would just want to reduce that time frame from having the license and having a bank account, because they can't start trading. They have the license, but they can't start trading due to not having a bank account. So I think that would lead into easing doing business in Mauritius.
Yeah, no, it's, I think, you know, that would be a major unblocker for many of the people that we've heard coming through the RSL process. So let's hope that they adopt that one. So that's great. That brings us to the end of the sort of formal recommendation section. But we would love to hear your questions around any of the topics that we've been discussing today. And we do have a few questions already lined up in the chat. So I'll come to those now. And if anyone wants to submit anything, ask Yusuf anything about this, please do so now. So this one actually looks like more of a comment. There are actually no specific tax frameworks for Mauritius, for FinTech, sorry. As a new industry, government should provide tax incentives to FinTech. So that was from Ryan. I don't know if you want to pick up on anything there, or they just nod your head and say, yep, I agree.
Yeah, I would say that I agree with that, because FinTech as a new industry that we're promoting, just as a background, it's been on the government radar since 2016, where we had a lot of blueprints, vision papers, policy papers being issued by the government. And I think they realized it, and we've seen it through, maybe it did not hit the hammer on the nail straight away, but it's encompassed into the ICT and innovation schemes. And we've been offered tax holidays for those specific industries. So I think more has to be done to promote the industry. And I think the government, as I mentioned, through how proactive they've been over the past few weeks, and even around December, when I was surprised that call for papers were being issued by the FSC, it shows that there's a willingness to hear from the stakeholders and get the industry moving and promote its growth. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, I was just going to jump in there. I think Sebastian has a follow-up question that leads nicely off of that. What percentage of papers actually become reality, according to you?
All right, okay. I was expecting something like that from Sebastian. All right, okay. Just to give you a brief, so where that figure of, I mentioned that earlier, 4.5 years to get regulatory changes. So we had a paper come out asking how customer experience can be improved in the banking industry. So we had to submit our views, which was done, and eventually came up into a report, which was submitted for further consideration by the different stakeholders. And when the guideline did come out, they had 2 years to implement that. So what was that report about? What was a guideline about? It was about informing consumers customers of banks, as to putting a disclaimer that they are at risk and what else to be clear in the fees that are being charged. Something very much straightforward, but required only publication of what was already in the fees leaflet to be putting it in a more prominent place in their marketing materials. And it took 4.5 years. So now you can imagine that we are talking about FinTech service providers license. And I'm hopeful, given the pace at which the government is proceeding with taking on board recommendation and inviting the Mauritius Africa FinTech Hub to working group sessions. And I hope, I'm like over optimistic as usual, but I'm hopeful that in the next 2 years, we can at least have a proper regulatory framework. And sorry for the attendees, I'm just reading what
you've been thrown off by Sebastian's belly dancing comment.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
No, that's fair enough. No, I think we're all hoping that things are starting to move at a faster pace now, and we're certainly seeing a little bit more traction. A lot, you know, as Yusuf has referred to, MAFH has been heavily involved in a lot of the recommendation panels that have been held, and so we're all hopeful that our voice is now being heard a little more
Yes,
clearly, and that things will be
definitely.
actioned a little faster moving forward. So going back to some questions, we have one here from Zaina. As you mentioned, we're working towards making Mauritius a strong fintech hub, yet we can find that the licensing fees are quite elevated. For example, the custodian services digital asset license annual fee of 350,000 rupees and the peer-to-peer lending license annual fee of 60,000 rupees. Are there measures to unburden startups regarding this? For example, deferred payments facilities?
Okay, I think as it stands right now, I'm not aware of any facilities that are being offered to startups for payment of licensing fees. And that's not only for the fintech industry, it's a legal requirement. So for example, even for the incorporation or trade license, I know that those trade fees that were below 5,000 rupees are now exempt from payment since 2 years ago. But for the fintech industry, there are no such measures that's been promoted or even canvassed by different stakeholders. So I hope that answers your question, Zaina.
Okay, great. And a question from Jason, who's been very patient because this was actually asked right at the beginning of the session. Apologies for coming so late to this one, Jason. Is there any progress that we can expect from regulations regarding blockchain and cryptocurrencies in Mauritius?
All right, okay. Thank you, Jason, for your question. I think the FSC has been very proactive in terms of issuing guidance notes. One of the first steps they did through the guidance notes that has been issued is to recognize digital asset as a class of asset for investment. I know it's very wordy, but that's exactly what it says in the document, as a class of assets for investment by sophisticated investors. So that's the first step. And we've also noticed that there's been a call for submitting recommendation on virtual assets and virtual asset service providers. So right now we are participating on the working group, and we also participating on the working group headed by the Ministry of Finance on the upcoming digital asset bill. So we can expect a lot of progress being done onto the cryptocurrencies, which would fall under the digital asset and virtual assets group. However, we need to be careful because we are mindful that we have international obligations to keep up with onto the AML and CFT. And one of the recommendations, which is number 15 from the FATF, deals specifically with virtual assets. So we have to be mindful that whatever regulation is one, it's both adapted to the market, but also that we are compliant with international obligations. So that's one thing. And then about blockchain, as it stands at the moment, we're still within the regulatory Sandbox license framework. There's not been much movement into promoting a specific legislation for blockchain technologies. So that's what I can say for now, Jason, and I hope that's clear to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Yusuf. We have one more question here. I think this is the last one relating to AI, but there's still time on the agenda. So if other people want to submit questions to Yusuf, we do still have some time. So Chatisha asks, what kind of forecast do you make about the adoption of enterprise AI in Mauritius, especially through the rise of modal ops in the business world?
All right, okay. I just have to say that that's beyond my remit. It seems a very technical perspective. I can answer anything regarding regulations, but not the technical, the technology behind it. So I'm trying to learn more as the days goes by about the technology, but it's evolving at such a rapid pace, Lisa. But you know, I'm still getting my head around IBM Watson, NLP.
You're a man of many talents, Yusuf. Another year in the business and you'll be able to advise us all about AI, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Okay, see if we've got any more questions coming in. Oh, Sebastian expressing his disappointment there.
Sorry to disappoint you, Sebastian. I would like to hear you.
Yeah, you're hiding behind the chat here, Sebastian. Right. Okay, well, if anybody has any final questions for Yusuf regarding the recommendations that the Mauritius Africa FinTech Hub has submitted with relation to the budget, now is the time to speak up. Don't be shy. Otherwise, if we are reaching the natural conclusion to this event, I would like to thank you all for your participation. And not just in today's event, but in the process of gathering data from our stakeholders. This is an essential part of us being able to represent your needs successfully. Without your input, without your response to these calls for input, we would not be able to represent the needs of the industry in the way that would be constructive. We all hope that these recommendations will fall onto fertile ground, and we will start to see some actions coming from this soon. And we would like to thank you for today's participation, for your support and interest in this space. Do please keep in touch with us. Let us know your thoughts. Let us know what other recommendations you'd like to see moving forward. Our ears are always open. Please participate in our upcoming events. I'd like to draw your attention to our cybersecurity webinar, which will be taking place this Friday, where we will be exploring the relationship between FinTech, digital transformation, and the new challenges that presents for cybersecurity. We'll also be briefly discussing recommendations to the, not recommendations, sorry, I've got recommendations in the brain now. We will be briefly discussing the recent call for views around the new ICT Act. So that's a hot topic of conversation I think many of you might be interested in. So do please join us at 2 p.m. on Friday for that. If you're not already signed up to our mailings, please do so. Stay in touch, and we look forward to welcoming you to future events. Thanks so much for coming. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to all. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sebastian. Finally got to hear you.
No, in fact, it was not Sebastian. It was Xavier using my account. This is Sebastian now. That's time to say goodbye.
Video.
Apart from AI, very disappointing.
Oh, sorry to disappoint you, Sebastian.
Well, we can say to you, now you have your video feed on, feel free to regale us with a hula dance.
No, you won't. I assure you that you don't want to see my belly dancing. Even my wife don't want to. There are still plenty of people, I think, hearing my songs.
Yeah, we do still have a number of people in the audience here. But thank you everyone for your attention, and yeah,
Thank you,
bye-bye. See you next time.